Okay, now let's move on to understand the responsible AI as a multi-stakeholder problem. I must acknowledge my scholars, my teaching assistants Sanjay and Subisha for doing a great work in reviewing the literature pertaining to RAI and several other issues which have been discussed in this course, particularly for reviewing research and providing me updated research review from time to time. Okay. They are very much a part of this course. So first of all, I refer to a paper in the Journal of Strategic Information Systems by Papagiannidis and others, published in this year on a general understanding of responsible AI principles, where these scholars actually review most published work on responsible AI and try to consolidate the different principles into 7 principles of responsible AI. This is because if you read different literature and regulations and principles highlighted by different bodies, okay, it could be country bodies, it could be stakeholders, as I said, there are overlapping principles, there are principles covered in one and not covered in the other, but it requires a detailed reading to understand what are these overlaps and sort of consolidate them into a set of consolidated principles. Okay, so that's what this research review tries to do. And what is the context? Okay, why do they do it? What's the motivation? So number one, there is limited understanding in operationalizing the RAI principles in designing, executing, monitoring and evaluating AI applications. As it is still evolving, there is a limited understanding and it is still growing. And governance, which actually puts together the principles into some framework for measuring, monitoring and assessing the impact of the governance principles on the phenomenon or on AI, is still in development. And also we can see that since AI is considered as an innovation and actually undertaken by technology companies and several startups, the focus is still on the innovation, not on the speed breakers, okay, not on regulation in most countries, and therefore it's not a priority. Okay, it's an ancillary task. If you put so much emphasis on RAI, then there is the development actually gets affected. Okay, and therefore we also already discussed Google's ethical dilemma in a previous case, and how Google fired someone who actually voiced concerns of RAI openly. So this is not something that falls in the interest of the developers, and therefore it's not a top priority. The priority is in developing innovative solutions. Okay, that itself places RAI often at the back side. A back seat is given, not a front seat. Okay, so we are not actually saying where should a RAI be placed. It should be in the driver's seat or be placed as a co-pilot. Okay, so this is something that the world will decide, but its due importance is still missing. That is what the authors actually highlight. Okay, now when we look at what is happening in the world in the field of RAI, increasing awareness about the potential negative effects of AI technologies on countries, on earth, okay, when it is collective, we call it existential issues, are being discussed, and its awareness is reflected by a few indicators. For example, European Union in 2019 created a high-level expert group on artificial intelligence, and they actually lay emphasis on trustworthy AI. Okay, so the terminology used here is slightly different. It's not responsible AI, and this overlapping labels something that we are going to see as we go, sometimes known as responsible AI, sometimes known as trustworthy AI, and there are common factors between these two concepts. Okay, and trustworthy AI, according to the European Union's high-level expert committee, is defined by three components: lawfulness, ethics, and robustness. Okay, so these three components together define a trustworthy AI. Okay, so AI should be lawful and AI should be ethical. Okay, being ethical doesn't mean that there is a law for it. Okay, so several principles remain as ethical principles for a long time before it becomes a law. I have already cited the example of GDPR. GDPR was not a law, but it became a law eventually a few years ago. Okay, so trustworthy as AI wants to look at not only lawfulness but also is something ethical. Okay, and also robustness in terms of its ability to sustain itself, okay, in adverse environments. Okay, so a similar development is Singapore government's AI governance framework in 2020. Okay, and it focuses on human-centered. Okay, I talked about human-centered versus market-centered regulation, but Singapore government has come out with guiding concept to foster AI trust based on human-centered solutions of well-being, safety, ethical norms, etc. And another UK government in 2023. Okay, so you can see that increasingly governments are actually taking up responsibility for AI. Okay, so this also indicates the growing significance of AI in national and international politics and governance. Okay, so UK government similarly has 5 principles to guide and inform the responsible development and use of AI in all sectors of the economy, and they highlight safety, security, robustness, appropriate transparency, explainability, fairness, accountability, context, etc. in the set of principles they framed. Okay, and no wonder when you look at all this, okay, you will see that the concerns that the governments are trying to protect are similar or overlapping, and therefore the need to consolidate them. And that is what the authors in this review do. They actually consolidate the different principles into a set of key responsible AI principles, okay, that are 7. Okay, so 7 principles, and each principles can be broken down into certain components. Okay, so that is what is depicted here. So number 1 principle is the principle of accountability. Accountability consists of auditability and responsibility. Accountability is ensured by auditability and responsibility. Okay, basically what is accountability? If something goes wrong, who is responsible? Okay, so we discussed this in an earlier session where responsibility attribution, okay, in the context of AI is an important problem, because there is a chain of actors who are involved right from development to deployment and use in AI systems, and therefore who is accountable for what is actually a matter of concern because of the complex nature, the complex chain, and accountability has to be distributed. That was one solution we learned in a previous session. So in the key principles, auditability in terms of the ability for a third party to audit AI for accountability is one dimension, and defining responsibility as to who would be responsible for what is defined as accountability principles. The second principle is diversity, non-discrimination and fairness. Well, you can see there are multiple principles combined into one term: diversity, non-discrimination and fairness. Okay, more of the ethical principles, and they are broken down into AI's development to deployment as accessibility and no unfair bias. So AI systems should be accessible to stakeholders, and also it should not have unfair bias. Okay, AI bias is something that we have already discussed in detail, and therefore the responsibility principle is it is embedded as a responsibility principle. Okay, the third principle highlighted by the reviewers from literature is human agency and oversight. Okay, this is again a key principle that governments are trying to drive today. Humans should have the dominance in AI. Okay, it should be human centered. Okay, and it should AI should target human well-being, and humans should be able to intervene and review AI systems at any stage. Okay, so it should not, no system should be left independently to machines, but at any stage humans should be able to intervene. That is set up as a key principle for responsible AI. Okay. Okay, this is implications for AI based hyper automation which is happening in different sectors. Okay, and the fourth principle is privacy and data governance. So this principle or this aspect we have seen in multiple times when we discussed AI, responsible AI before. So the authors actually break down this principle into data quality, data privacy, and data access, essentially to ensure data privacy and governance are implemented in AI systems. The remaining three key responsible AI principles are technical robustness and safety, transparency, and social and environmental well-being. Technical robustness and safety have accuracy, reliability, general safety, and resilience, which are building blocks of robustness. Okay, so robustness checks that the system function the same way in different environments have to be ensured through this subdimensions. And transparency is a related topic. We already discussed interpretability and explainability of AI models, and that is what is actually commonly labeled as transparency. Okay, what is a black box machine is not generally accepted as a responsible AI system, and therefore transparency is what should actually get importance in a AI from a RAI perspective. Okay. And lastly, social and environmental well-being. We have already seen AI has social impact, AI has existential challenges, AI has impact on environment and emissions, and hence social well-being and environmental well-being are constituting the seventh RAI principle when the principles of RAI are consolidated. Okay, let's move on. So the set of 7 principles what we have seen is neither multilateral nor multi-stakeholder as we saw in the beginning, but it is literature. Okay, so there is no enforcing body, or there is no stakeholders together there. It's a group of researchers who did this job of consolidating principles. But we can also individually look at certain bodies like the OECD. Okay, OECD is a multilateral, multi-government group for certain economic values. Okay, they uphold. Okay, so they also come up with principles. For example, OECD already has a set of privacy principles to preserve data privacy. Okay, so they address issues that are global in nature, and obviously OECD has come out with a set of AI principles, which is, as I said, a multilateral body, but OECD also engage a lot with stakeholders. Okay, and hence you may actually look at OECD as a body which is both multilateral and multi-stakeholder in nature, and you can see the set of value-based principles that is given on the left side, and if you read them you can see that it's already covered in the set of 7 principles that we have already seen. Okay, so I don't want to repeat this principle, but you can always look at how the set of principles are grouped and emphasized in the OECD AI principles. And RAI governance, according to literature, is a set of practice for developing, deploying and monitoring AI applications in a safe, trustworthy and ethical manner that ensures appropriate functionality of AI over the entire life cycle. Okay, this is defined in research literature. And essentially, if we look at different sources of literature, there will be synonymous terms for AI governance, which sometimes may be called principled AI, sometimes responsible AI, sometimes trustworthy AI. As I already highlighted, these labels are overlapping, and sometimes principle becomes a framework and then it becomes AI governance. I have already covered this. Okay, let's move on. Okay, we are now examining certain bodies or entities or groups which have contributed to AI principles and AI governance framework. Okay, SAIF, SAIF is actually developed by Google. Okay, and of course it is there in the public domain, so it could be adopted by anyone that's understanding. And they actually provide 6 principles, okay, as foundations for AI governance. That is what is depicted in this particular slide. It is characterized by strong security foundations, bring AI into organizations' threat universe, harmonize platform level controls, contextualize AI system for different domains, because AI's impact on different domains can be different. We can see that this domain focus will be reflected in NIST's framework as well. Automate defenses to keep pace and controls and feedback loops for AI development. Okay, so but this is at a high level. When you review this, you can see the details of SAIF, which are useful for implementation at a governance level. Okay. Now, SAIF is proposed by an entity called an organization. So it is for governance. So there are governance principles and frameworks initiated by organizations. There are also multi-stakeholder bodies like the NIST, okay, National Institute for Standards and Technology, which is a US-based body. I would call it a multi-stakeholder body because it's not a multilateral as I observe it. And it's a body that develops standards and framework for managing technology. Okay, and AI is a technology. NIST has a framework for cybersecurity, and for different issues that cut across countries and organizations, not just issues but technology issues. NIST actually frames standards and frameworks, and they have recently come up with a framework known as NIST AI risk management framework. Okay, so it is actually looking at AI risk. Okay, so ultimate goal is to ensure AI is governed in a way by a set of principles that is in the interest of its stakeholders. Okay, and it is actually having 3 characteristics. It's voluntary, it's rights preserving and non-sector specific, and it is not based on any particular use case. It's not based on case studies, but it is more generic in nature. And it has four core dimensions or 4 core aspects. Okay, because it is viewed at a high level, not at the detail level, we have to see that there are, when you look at it, you can see 4 things from the top. Okay, they consist of govern, map, measure and manage. I will sort of detail it in the next slide. And thirdly, it provides flexibility in implementation to organizations and society. Okay, so when you read something like AI RMF, you get a sense of how this issue of AI should be addressed at an entity level, at an organizational level. What are the areas where one should focus on, and how this can be detailed out depending on the context of the organization or the entity. Okay, so NIST AI RMF, there are 4 functions as I highlighted in the previous slide, and you can see governance is at the center. Okay, so the activities pertaining to AI should be governed at a core. Okay, and AI would involve number one, mapping. Mapping here means context. Okay, the context in which AI system is developed. Okay, it's the context of a bank could be different from the context of a healthcare organization. Healthcare organizations AI system could be having different characteristics and fairness issues, etc. when you implement it in a educational institution. When you give AI for an individual, the context could be different and depending on where the individual is. So hence the context or the sector, etc. Should be understood first. Okay, and the second is measurement. Particularly since it is a risk management framework, it focuses on measuring risk. Okay, so in risk management, when you study in detail, you will find that it starts with identification and then quantification. Sorry, identification and then measurement. Okay, and only if you can measure, you can actually quantify. So that aspect has a clear focus in NIST framework because it tries to assess risk. Okay, and then manage. Okay, you can't manage that which you cannot measure, you cannot manage. It's a broad management principle. So measurement comes first and then management as to how you manage those risks. Okay, so you can see there is a governance body which actually oversees. It is at the center, which ensures that all the 3 aspects are addressed. Okay, so the role of governance is basically to ensure that the principles of RAI are implemented through mapping, measurement and management. Okay, so that is the NIST framework. And NIST also has highlighted what are the potential harms of AI to different stakeholders, okay, including the society. Okay, it could be at different levels. Okay, the AI system can cause harm to people. It could be individuals, it could be groups, it could be a society. It can cause harm to organizations, including an organization's reputation or its revenues. It can have multiple impacts. It can cause harm to ecosystem, as we have already seen. That is the highest level where the society at large or earth can actually face major existential threats, particularly with the artificial general intelligence. And there could also be unique AI risk which are not even identified at this moment, but which could be emergent. Okay, that is another potential harm that the framework actually is throwing light on. And when it comes to challenges, okay, so the framework actually gives you certain guidance as to how to govern and manage AI risk at different levels, but there are different challenges an entity will face when you try to implement it, which is highlighted in the AI RMF of NIST. They highlight risk measurement challenges. Okay, it is easy to say that things should be measured, but when you actually develop measures, okay, for risk, you will find that each measure is having certain biases or limitations, and assigning numbers to certain phenomena would be extremely difficult and error prone. Okay, and the systems are still under development, so measurement is a huge challenge, and prioritizing which risk is important and which is less important. Okay, for example, whether Google should focus on existential risk or it should focus on the financial risk of organizations. So this is a matter of priority. Okay, and how do we actually prioritize AI risk is another challenging topic. Okay, and how much risk can be tolerated. Okay, or what you call the risk appetite, okay, should also be rationalized, and that is not a easy task. Okay. And integrating other forms of organizational risk into along with AI risk. So the integration challenge. Okay, enterprise risk management, for example, ERM, is an established framework where even cyber security or technology risk are also incorporated. But AI risk is another dimension which needs to be integrated with the existing frameworks, and that is another challenge the AI RMF actually highlights. Okay. Let me now close with certain developments that is very recent at the level of regulation. So far we have looked at AI, responsible AI from the perspective of different types of bodies which and the mechanisms for balancing multi-stakeholder concerns through principles, through governance frameworks and risk management frameworks, etc. And also regulation, as we have already seen, is a non-market method for addressing stakeholder interest or balancing stakeholder interest. And you can see that European Union is one of the first multilateral bodies which has come out with a regulation which is a binding law on the constituent countries of the European Union, where the regulation clearly says what is unacceptable and what should be ensured by law by all the member countries, okay, to manage or control risk. Okay, and most risks are considered in EU's artificial intelligence regulation. Okay. And it actually places responsibility on developers and those who deploy, and also on users certain responsibility. And it is not only applicable to those who are located in the European Union, but it could be also those who are outside of the EU. It is also in line with the GDPR for data privacy, which was implemented in EU, where those outside EU will also be responsible if they are actually doing business with EU. Okay. So it also actually looks at the general purpose AI and its potential harm to humanity and member countries, and therefore it addresses those issues also. I do not want to read out the regulation in detail, but the regulation ensures that there is very minimal harm of AI to people and society of the member countries, at the same time not stopping or not discouraging the development of AI. Okay, that is what countries have to ensure. If you over-regulate, you cannot actually ensure economic growth. Let me also highlight before I close some recent developments in India. And a broad issue as I look at the technology space in India is that there will be different government bodies which will be involved, and which will also be actually developing different frameworks and principles. Okay, it is not very different when it comes to AI. When it comes to data privacy also, you can see the same phenomenon. There are multiple government agencies which develop this principles and which are also involved in the governance. Okay, and then coordination among the multiple bodies becomes a challenge. Okay, that challenge is visible here also. NITI Aayog in 2018, a government body, has come up with a specific body called National Strategy, or a specific initiative called National Strategy on AI, that is known as NSAI. Okay, so it highlights AI for all. That is a broad principle that NITI Aayog strategy actually highlights. In competition or alongside, you can also see MeitY, which is the IT department or the IT ministry of the government of India. They have actually something called India AI mission to ensure safe and trusted AI while not hampering the development and deployment of AI. So there are two bodies and two different sort of initiatives which are visible there, and you can see AI standardization committee has been formed by Department of Telecommunications to create various interface standards and develop India's AI stack. This is by the Department of Telecommunications, and also principles for responsible AI has been framed by NSAI. You can see that NSAI is the Niti Aayog strategic initiative. They have now come out with principles for responsible AI. So one conclusion you can draw is that the Indian government is quite active and focused on developing and promoting development of AI, but in a responsible way. You can also see that multiple government departments are involved in it, and coordinated development and focus would be important. I will conclude here at the end of this slide. Thanks to my TAs, research assistants, they have done a great job of consolidating different resources and initiatives, resources for understanding different initiatives as part of this slide, and this is something you can access to study this topic further. And references that are used for this session are also highlighted in the slide. Thank you very much for listening to this session. I hope since it is a developing field and AI is a future technology, you also have to wait for future to see how we evolve into the future, having potential of AI maximum realized, at the same time ensuring safe habitat for the earth and its inhabitants. Not only humans, but all inhabitants of earth are safe, and their well-being is ensured. That is the ultimate goal with which AI system should be developed. Thank you very much.